Welcome back to another episode of the React Native Radio podcast. This week, we've got another installation in our Expovember series. Episode 315, What to Do Without App Center, with Quinn Jung.
Welcome back to React Native Radio, everyone. I'll keep it brief. I'm Robin. He's Mazen. We are React Native Radio. We do have a lovely guest today. I'm sitting here not only with Mazen, but with Quinn Jung. She's a software engineer at Expo, and she leads work on EAS Update. And then she's originally from Vancouver, Canada, I'm reading, and now based in Seattle. And she enjoys gardening and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in her spare time. That's pretty exciting. Welcome, Quinn.
Glad to be here, Robin.
So we're here to talk about App Center and Code Push. But before we get into our topic, I should let you know about our sponsor, who is, of course, Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the U.S. We're a team of 30 senior plus level React Native developers and support staff, and we've been doing this for nearly a decade. I'm excited for someday being able to say over a decade. But if you're looking for React Native expertise for your next project, be sure to hit us up at infinite.red/radio. And of course, mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, let's get into our topic, which is what to do without App Center. And we're going to talk about that. But before that, I got to go back to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu thing. So, because that's like the coolest thing ever. How long have you been doing Jiu-Jitsu?
I've been doing it on and off for about a year now. So before I settled in Seattle, I was nomadic. And it was like one of those things where you need a hobby. And one of those things where if you're in an urban area, there's always going to be a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym or whatever you can train at.
I can already I can picture the one that's like near my house. Yeah, there's always one
everywhere.
Yeah, it's a much better hobby than say golfing or tennis, where wherever you relocate, there might not be a golf course, there might not be a tennis court, but there's always going to be like a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym. That's one of the rules of the world, kind of like the rules of the internet.
So what if I can ask, what belt are you now?
I'm currently a white belt. So because I switch so often, I'm always perpetually the new person. So perpetually white belt.
Well, you'll have to let us know when you get that belt progression. What's the belt after white?
So it depends if you're an adult or a child. So as an adult, it goes from white, blue, purple, and black, or I think there might have been a brown in between. But for children, it's like a different color progression. Like there's yellow and there's gray.
Oh, interesting. I wonder why is it different? I wonder.
I don't know. Maybe there's different milestones. So children might progress more slowly than adults. So you want to acknowledge each milestone.
You want to keep rewarding. You're like,
that makes sense.
You got to keep them interested. Yeah. But it's like, I want all the colors of the rainbow. Come on. Well, that's really cool. On the tech side of things, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you got started at Expo and sort of how you got into the industry and what's your story?
Yeah, so I started at Expo in the early days, so in 2017. And this was back when we all were working in one small tiny house in Palo Alto. So to paint you a picture, like when you first go in, there would be the precursor of EAS build running in the back room, and they'll be like, don't use the kettle. If you use the kettle, it'll trip the circuit. And then the build service will go down. So that's...
No way.
Yeah, so super early days.
That's amazing. So that was back when it was called Exponent, right?
Yeah, Exponent.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and then they shortened it. Oh, that's wild. So have you been on the EAS update team from the beginning, or did you start somewhere else?
So I started off as a generalist. So just whatever people wanted, we'd have this canny board where people would upvote all the features that they wanted. And it was truly a democracy. Whatever had the most upvotes would be the thing that you'd work on.
Oh, wow.
And I dabbled in a lot of things. So for example, like the brightness module, somebody wanted it rewritten, so you'd rewrite it. But eventually, I ended up specializing in the infra stack and EAS update eventually.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very cool. I love hearing about like the early days of companies that have grown big and that everyone uses now.
I remember
it's like hearing about the days when like Facebook was in a garage and
Yeah. I do remember that like upvote thing. It was open to the community too, right? Like where it was like a discussion board almost, and based on the number of upvotes it got worked on kind of thing. Is that right?
Yeah. So think of it as a kind of Stack Overflow Kanban board.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I remember that. Yeah. That was pretty cool. I also was the troll that kind of went in there and said up, 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 up. to everything.
Mazen.
No, because that was when Expo had first started, and I was like, I think I see the vision here. Let's get all these modules in. And, hindsight, obviously, apologies, but maybe I
Mazen's
helped push Expo get to where they are now. I don't know. Just saying. Anyways.
making all these demands of a team of however big you guys were at that
Right.
point.
At least the
Working in a
upvotes
house
weren't
with it.
random. They were very directed.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So we should probably talk about our actual topic too. As I'm sure most everyone who's listening has heard, Microsoft App Center is shutting down. So if you don't know about App Center, Microsoft App Center was one of the first React Native, like do it all kind of services that did like React Native builds, and they had a particularly popular service called CodePush, which we'll talk about. But they announced earlier this year that they are shutting down completely. And so a lot of people that are using App Center are having to find alternatives. So today we're mostly discussing the Expo alternative, which is EAS, and how Expo and its tools can sort of step in and be a good replacement for the App Center features. So App Center features were build, test, distribute, diagnostics, and analytics. I pulled these straight from my App Center dashboard. These are things that are on the sidebar. They're like main features. But let's start with build. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Mazen, have you used App Center's build functionality at all?
I have not used App Center at all. I have heard anecdotally a lot of maybe it's the time that I'm asking these questions now with Expo being around, that everyone is very, can we say this on air? Anyway, hot take. Everyone's happy. I'm not going to name names, but everyone's happy that App Center is going away while EAS and Expo exists in this ecosystem. That's my take. And I guess I'll follow that same sentiment. I love Expo and their for EAS and their developer experience for sure.
Well, let's talk about build specifically. Quinn, can you talk about how EAS build can step in and replace App Center build?
Yeah, for sure. So the way most people are introduced to our build service is when they have an Expo app and then they run the command EAS build on the command line. So what that does is it takes your project in the directory and it uploads it to our servers. And you can see on the website like all the build steps that it takes to convert like your Android or your iOS build into a binary. I'd say it's not just for Expo apps, it's for plain React Native apps as well. So for Expo apps, we run pre-build and it generates the iOS and Android directory. And that's basically a plain React Native app. And if we see the iOS or Android directories, we'll just continue building it like, oh, it's a regular React Native
It's like, okay,
app.
we don't need to pre-build.
Yeah.
We'll just continue. Yeah. It's built on Fastlane, right?
It is, yeah. So actually, late last year, we released something called custom builds where you can more easily declare things in your build. So honestly, it's a YAML file. So like all the steps for the build are declared step by step and you can modify it. You can run any command. And in theory, if your build can be expressed with a gem file, it can be built on our systems in Fastlane.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us probably remember the old days before EAS, before EAS, before Expo. Like that's how we were doing our our automated builds was with just like Fastlane scripts that would be like, okay, first you do like certificates and profiles, then you run like Xcode or Gradle or whatever the actual like build command, and then you like figure out where the binary is and upload it to wherever it needs to go. And that's essentially what EAS is doing. So what I love about EAS build, and I've used it for quite a while, is it really takes a lot of the pain of all the like auxiliary steps, like the certificates and stuff. It really takes the pain out of those in a way that doing it manually didn't. And it even has like the option for local builds is so cool. And like in the customization that you were talking about. So like people who are worried like, oh, I don't want to be tied into this like third party ecosystem, whatever, like that's really not the case. Like you have so many ways to customize your builds and have control. We even have like a client where we do local builds and we like pass our own credentials, and like there's so many ways to use it.
I think, one other thing with a client that I'm actually going to mention a lot during this episode, for build, we are doing a situation where we create our build, but then we analyze the build based off of Expo Fingerprint, if listeners are familiar with that. And, based on that fingerprint reading of the build, we decide if we need to go through our full test suite and our full build pipeline process. So, for example, you change the README file. Do you really need to test and build and do everything that you usually do in every pull request commit? Oh, you forgot a period. Push another commit. Okay, got to wait another hour.
Now you wait, like run your full
right
CI suite.
Exactly. So, build and all the customizations, and even sometimes local build. We were initially doing this locally. That gives you the ability to kind of have all that. And I do remember you mentioned Fastlane, Robin. I remember having to do that and doing that in Fastlane, but I remember that being overly complex in doing.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I said, developer experience has been elevated.
I would never go back at this point.
No, never.
Yeah. So one thing I will say about Fastlane is when you do run the build locally, it does expect your environment to be configured a certain way, and it does take some finagling.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early days, I remember we would ship Fastlane in the CLIs for everybody to run. And Fastlane is written in Ruby, and it's one of those things where it's notoriously hard to run uniformly on everybody's machines. So I totally feel your pain.
Oh, yeah. I remember I used to be a Ruby dev. And so I always had like the latest Ruby on my machine. I had like Ruby version managers and all this stuff. And so it was pretty easy. And then I moved to React Native, and all of a sudden like my Ruby environment was always like way behind, and trying to figure out like why Fastlane was failing. It was like, oh, it's like my Ruby is out of date. And then you upgrade Ruby, and then you're like, oh shoot, now I also have to upgrade like Bundler. And then I have to like rebundle and get all the right gems. And
Yeah.
it's like I'm already having to maintain my Node environment, like all my Node versions, my NPM versions, like my main development stack. And then also having to like manage all of my Ruby versions and gem files and all that stuff was just an unnecessary headache. And now I'm like, the EAS servers just like, they have everything and it just works. And I just have to run a command.
Just works.
It just works. She should trademark that. So let's move to test. So I've never actually used this feature of App Center myself, but from what I've read, it's a feature where not only can you run your builds, but maybe before you run your builds, you can run your test suite, your integration test suite. I think App Center said they support things like Appium, and a few other specific test frameworks. So what sort of options does Expo or EAS provide for filling this test void that App Center's leaving?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, when you run EAS build, it kicks off a build job and it has all these build steps. And late last year, we released a customization where you could declare these build steps in a YAML, but in addition, declare these test steps. So we released support for running Maestro tests on simulators, But really, because you can just run any command you want on the machine as long as it's specified in a YAML. It can be Jest, it could be pretty much anything. But right now we have the most support for the Maestro tests.
That's awesome. We've been using Maestro for the last couple of years, and we really like it. So it is like, are there any limitations on like the software stack that's on the servers? Whether like, because Maestro needs like to be able to run simulators, right? So I'm guessing you have to run it on Mac machines or something like that.
Yeah. So a lot of our machines, they are Mac runners, and we do have a slew of simulators all set up. In the YAML files, like if you don't specify anything, we'll just use the default simulator. But if you want, you can also specify like a device ID, and we'll run it on the simulator if it exists.
That's really cool. It's so weird for me to imagine like a simulator running on like a headless server, because I'm like, if no one is looking at it on a monitor, is it really working? I don't know. It just seems odd to me. Go ahead, Mazen.
I can confirm that we are using this pipeline that you're talking about, Quinn, and it's working very well for us. I mentioned about the fingerprints and all that, but let's say it gets all through all that. We run through all our Maestro tests on the cloud, and it's great. Like, I know EAS has EAS Cloud, which is a different product where you can run tests on there. And Maestro also has Maestro Cloud, and you can see screenshots. You can see re-recordings of all this. You don't get all that by doing it in GitHub Actions, which is fine if it works for you. But we do have the ability where when it does crash, so let's say you get to a screen where you're supposed to press a specific row within your row of products, but Maestro doesn't find it because you forgot to scroll to press it, you will get a screenshot in your errors, which you can kind of go into an EAS dashboard and get that screenshot, and it will tell you what your error was, and you get to see those green check marks and red X's that you usually see in your terminal. So it does a very good job of alleviating all that for you.
And Robin, to your point on it's running headless on the machine, so we do export artifacts. So if the test was successful or failed, you can download those. But to Mazen's point on like being able to see screenshots, that's honestly where we want to be in the future. But like to have more support to be able to go to the dashboard and be like, oh, I can actually see right away like where it is. But right now we're on the road to just releasing these more custom steps and these custom workflows that you can just like run anything on your workers.
Yeah, it seems like you have a lot of flexibility to run like whatever you need to run. So we're able to build the app with EAS build, and we're able to test the app and run whatever test suites we have. So that's 2 App Center features that we've covered. Let's move to distribute, which is probably the one that most people are talking about. And I think most people who were still using App Center were using, because distribute includes code push. So there's actually kind of two parts to the distribution. So there's the App Center provides the ability to upload a binary, or like either you've built it on App Center itself or you've built it somewhere else and you can upload a binary, and they distribute it, meaning there's a way for your users to go to a link and download the build onto their device. So that's one piece. So let's talk a little bit about how Expo and EAS cover that. I think that's probably internal distribution. Is that correct?
Yeah. So for that one, it's basically distributing your app, a more production version of your app, but in a way that you can just scan a QR code and it'll download it on your phone. And behind the hood, we use something called an ad hoc provisioning profile, which is used for this type of distribution from Apple, where you register your device and we put it on the profile, and you're able to see what this version of your app will look like before it hits test flight or before it hits the App Store. And in a way that you can distribute it very easily to anybody, or like the marketing guide. They just scan the code and the app just plops in.
Yeah. So if users are wanting to distribute to more of a like open-ended, like anybody can download, not necessarily people who have the ability to like register their devices, is there a way to do that as well? Or is that going to go into submitting to the App Store territory.
Yeah, so for Android, there isn't that limitation, so anybody can do that. But for iOS platforms, there is a limit of 100 devices on this kind of like QR code
Apple
distribution.
Of
is
course.
notoriously,
Yeah.
they're so locked down about it. But EAS does have the ability to programmatically submit to the App Store, correct?
Yeah, so that's a service called EAS Submit and EAS Metadata to help fill out all those forms.
I know. Getting the store listing correct is a whole thing. But yeah, EAS Submit to the App Store is pretty new. It was in beta the last time I checked. Is it ready for prime time now?
So EAS Submit, definitely. EAS Metadata, the last I heard, it does work, but we only have support for it for iOS, so not for the Google Play stores. But end to end, you're able to chain like a build job with a submission. So like you can just run a command and it'll build your app and it'll just submit it to the stores.
Super useful. And I think App Center did something similar as well, where you could take your binary and forward it to the store. So that's great. Mazen, is this something you've ever played around with, the submit and the metadata?
Yes. Last year's Chain React app, I believe, we went full EAS. This was kind of like when EAS was still starting out. And I'm pretty sure we used EAS metadata for the last push to the store, which was actually the Monday before the conference started on Wednesday. It involved all that. Yeah.
Awesome. So the other half of distribution is assuming you've gotten your app on people's devices. If you have a bug or something you want to change in the JavaScript of your app, App Center provided something called Code Push, which is a way to change the JavaScript bundle without having to resubmit to the store. What's the Expo replacement for Code Push?
Yeah, so I wouldn't exactly say it's a replacement. So they're all over the air updates, but there are some different concepts where I will say you are able to ship updates over the air. That's what we both have in common. But there are some foundational differences in Code Push and EAS Update where, for example, I'm going on a tangent here, but Code Push has something called deployment targeting, which we don't quite have, or that concept isn't quite there. In EAS Update, we have a concept called like runtimes and fingerprints, where like we automatically detect whether the native layer is compatible with the update, and if it is, then we ship it.
Interesting.
We both do over the air updates, but the way we go about it is slightly different.
But I do like how with EAS updates, you have the, what do you call them, the profiles? Well, I assume they begin from your build process where, you create, let's say you have a production profile, the one that goes to your store, but at the same time, you have a, let's call it preview profile, which is being sent to your QA team, your internal team, pre-release to the store. You have an update you want to push. You push it to your preview first. QA goes in, tests it, confirms it, then you kind of push it to your production channel. So then it's in prod for your users without having to push out a store release. I think they're pretty much the same, just probably labeled and marketed differently, right? So you're saying, Code Push has the build pipeline,
Code
whatever
Push
you call
has
it.
like deployment
Paths.
keys, and you push to a specific deployment key.
Yeah. I think you guys do it in a different concept. In my opinion, personally, I think that's a more, how do I say this? A more streamlined approach that you guys follow with the build profiles, because I think that's a little more, how we would follow the process, right? So it's straightforward. You need to push a over-the-air update to preview. Boom. Preview validates it. Done. Let's get it into production. Done. Wherein we merge it to main, or even, do that from main specifically if it's just a JavaScript update. And it's something we actually toyed around with for the Chain React app. I keep mentioning that app because that was one that, it's open source and we can kind of reference to. And we'll put in the show notes the pull request for over-the-air updates. But we had over-the-air updates ready to go. And, we built such a stellar app, we never had to use it.
When you have an app that's being used like over a 2-day period, like, and you don't have time to go through an app store review process.
No, they would be released like a week after the conference. The videos would be out before you get the release out.
I am a little bit still a little bit curious whether like so there's differences in how you approach over the air updates, but are there differences functionally for developers in what they're able to do and what they're able to accomplish?
So when Code Push went away, a lot of people went to us and they said, hey, like there's all these things that we expect to be done in the over-the-air update service. Like, can you guys do it? And for the most part, yes. As Mazen had said before, like a lot of concepts we have, but they're called something different. So instead of the deployment key, we have something called a channel. And that's basically like the environment that your build runs in. So all of that, it works very similarly. There are some niche cases, though, that don't quite map one-to-one, in which case some people who really did rely on that in Code Push are a little bit sad. But
what are some of those niche cases? I'm curious.
yeah, so in Code Push, there's something called, I want to call it environment surfing. So, for example, if you had a build that was in the staging environment in Code Push, there would be APIs that you can run to switch it over to a production environment, like from the client. So not from the server side, but running the build, you can
Like on your device, you
Yeah.
can be like, I'm going to switch this to a different.
yeah.
Whoa.
And
It's almost like A/B testing in a way.
yeah.
It gives you the ability to leverage A/B testing.
Yeah, and it was a use case that we never thought would occur in production. So we do have this functionality in terms of development client builds, where in development you can switch all these environments and stuff. But at the time, we were like, dang, people are doing this. They're switching it at runtime from the client in a production environment. And so that's like one thing that we were surprised to learn about. And like I'd say the past couple of weeks, we've been working to get that functionality on par, to be able to switch that if people want it. It just like wasn't something that had occurred to us at the time.
People do some weird
Yeah.
things. I'm always shocked at the things people rig up to do in their apps. So yeah, so you said it sounds like you guys are working on building some of these features that App Center folks were asking for.
Yeah. So as of today, it is possible. We haven't released the docs for it, but as people start coming to us, we're like, oh dang, like there is some niche functionalities that
It's like the Starbucks secret menu right now.
yeah, or the In-N-Out secret menu.
Yeah. You gotta know someone who can give you the the deep. That's funny. So that was distribution, including Code Push. The last couple of things that App Center provides are diagnostics, aka crash reporting, and analytics. So can you talk a bit about what kind of options people have either in the Expo ecosystem or otherwise for crash reporting and analytics?
Yeah. So for crash reporting, when I think of that is like the kind of product where if an error occurs, you can go to some kind of dashboard and be like, oh, like this was my error. This was the stack trace, and not just the minified stack trace. Like you can actually see it mapped
Right.
to
The actual
yeah.
with like, yes, that's the worst.
Yeah.
When you go and you see the error, but you're like, oh, there's no stack trace that I can
Yeah.
actually use.
Yeah, so I'd say on the server you can get away with that, but for mobile development, like you need to have that source map that takes that minified code and brings it back to the code that is actually readable, especially with Hermes. I will say we do not have a product like that for EAS, but the one that we do recommend is Sentry, and it's because we've been working with them for so many years. We collaborated with the Sentry React Native guy. His name was Christoph Woldrich.
Yeah, we just had him. We actually just had him on the show a couple weeks ago,
Very cool.
talking about Sentry and React Native. They're a really great team, and they're very like React Native React Native is a first class citizen to them, not just a like, oh, we need a wrapper around our iOS SDK for React Native. And we're big Sentry fans around here too.
Yeah. We collaborated with him last year with Evan Bacon, and the attention to detail that they put into that repo is quite impressive.
Mhm.
So for that reason is why we would recommend them, because they've got really good integration with React Native.
Well, crash reporting is so complex. It totally makes sense that like you want a service that's dedicated to that. And so I'm really glad that we have Sentry and that they have such a close partnership with Expo, because you guys can do what you're really good at and they can do what they're really good at, and we can have both. There's other options out there, obviously. Crashlytics, Bugsnag, Datadog also all have solid React Native SDKs. I'm using Bugsnag on a client project right now. I've used Crashlytics in the past. So you have a lot of options for crash reporting. And I think anecdotally, I think most people out there were probably already using a lot of these other services for their crash reporting anyway, and not necessarily App Center. So I'm not seeing it as a big loss.
So I'd say one key thing to look for on how good their integration is with React Native for crash analytics is whether there's source map uploads options for both your build and your over-the-air update. So I will say over-the-air update is one thing that is missed a lot in a lot of documentation. And there needs to be a way to link that. Otherwise, if you run it over the air update and you don't upload the source map for it, you're just going to get minified gibberish.
Mhm.
Oh, I never thought about that. That's a really good point. Because it's a brand new JavaScript bundle, so you'd have to have brand new source maps for it. That makes so much sense. So Sentry has support for over-the-air source map?
Sentry does. And I also took a look at Bugsnag, and Bugsnag definitely does as well. I don't know for sure if like Datadog and Crashlytics have it, but yeah, that's just like the two things to look for. Upload your source maps for build, which is usually done in the config plugins or at the build steps, but also like over-the-air updates where there needs to be a way to upload that.
It's a good call out.
Really good tip. So if you're doing over-the-air updates, make sure that you choose a crash analytics provider that supports source maps for your OTA updates. Do you have anything else you want to add to that section?
No, just that one thought. Thanks.
Cool. I love it. So the last App Center feature that we'll talk about is analytics. And that covers like just insights about your app, how your users are using it, tracking events like what things they click on and what screens they go to. App Center provided analytics. Does Expo provide an analytics solution? Maybe there's a new one coming.
Yeah, so we have something called EAS Insights. It's in beta mode right now. So the way I think of it is there's like general analytics and service or incidental service specific analytics.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, we have something called the Expo Insights package where like if you install that, like you'll get general analytics, like what OS version are your users running, app versions, like how many users in general do you have? And then there's like incidental insights. So for example, for EAS update, we do get stats when people ask what is my newest update. We do send some small statistic packages with that. So for example, we can figure out what the current updates people were running was, whether they had failed installs and they had to roll back to the original update, like how many times their app crashed. And I would call those incidental insights that we can use, and together they can all we can get a bigger picture on what's happening.
Yeah, that seems really, really helpful. Because like knowing which OTA updates they installed. Like, oh, have they installed the latest patch? Okay, well, that's why it's failing. Or they installed the latest update and then they had to revert because it failed. Okay, well, then that helps you pinpoint like where the problem is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that seems really... So you said it's in beta?
It's in beta, and from the update side, where I personally want this to go is you get all this data from like people who have had their apps crash and from other services that people have, and you can use it to paint a picture of like, was this update healthy? What are the state of these person's users? But once you have that data, you could expose an API to create actions, automatic actions of that data. So people can have like a plan to be like, oh, well, if there were X amount of crashes or whatever, you just like automatically take an action. And that can be specified by the developer. But when you have enough of those insights, that becomes a very powerful thing.
Oh yeah, that would be a bit like, oh, if there's 10 crashes with the new update, automatically like revert them to the previous one or something like that.
Yeah, and with any release, especially like say if you have something like 20,000 people who've installed the app, there's always going to be some baseline percentage that have their app crash. But when you start noticing a higher rate where it's statistically significant, then you can have enough confidence to be like, oh, there was something wrong with this update in a way that wasn't wrong before.
Right.
Those are the people usually running the old OSs, old Android
Yeah.
devices, so.
As a dev, I'm not satisfied until it's 0, but that's never happened.
Yeah, there's always going to be somebody with like an old update or like an old OS. I feel like that's like one of the rules of mobile computing. There's like always going to be someone with an old app version, an old update, or a crashing update.
Yeah. One of the backend devs on my current project is still running. He's running an iPhone 11 with, I don't remember what OS, but it's old. And I'm like, you're a developer. Come on. Awesome. So does EIS Insights, is it all sort of like passive insights, or is there a way to do more like intentional insights? Like I want to send an event like when my user does this thing in the app.
Yeah. So in terms of intentional insights, we have something called the Expo Insights package, where when it makes network requests, it is for the purpose of statistics for insights. Whereas like the passive insights are more for Expo updates, where like you, especially since like we have this open source protocol where we say, hey, like this is what we expect the update service to do, and people rely on like the implementation of this protocol, which is Expo Updates package. And they run their self-hosted solutions on that as well. Like you can't just have network requests for the sole purpose of statistics, at least for Expo updates. Like you can send them incidental to like, oh, if somebody is wanting an update, you can extrapolate information from that. But for the Expo updates package itself, you wouldn't want to be making these extraneous network requests. In the future, where we see this as like to strike a balance is if somebody had both Expo updates and the Insights package, like you could use the Insights package to send more richer updates from Expo, like the Expo updates package, so that like it'd be Expo Insights that is responsible for sending those intentional network requests. But it would be because like the user or the developer wanted it, as opposed to just like having Expo updates. And you can see like what we don't want is having somebody like look over the network and being like, why are there all these insight requests? Like I didn't know this was a thing.
Basically what happens when I open my network panel in Chrome on any website ever. I'm like, what? What are all these requests?
Yeah, that's honestly my pet peeve when you install a package and you're like, I want it to do X. It has one job, but it just sends a huge stream of network requests for like insights and statistics. And if people don't want that, then you just don't send that, versus if they had an actual insights package where it's more intentional,
Yeah. Seems like you'd at least be able to like batch them somehow, so it's not just like firing off like a request every time they touch anything.
Yeah, which is when you say the batching, why it's more an intentional thing when you use Expo Insights, where it's kind of like the Datadog stats daemon where it's like running in the background and it batches things and does it in an efficient way versus like having all these like other packages that kind of do their own stats. You can batch them all in one insights request if there was like a specialized insights package.
So that actually covers all of App Center's main features. So it feels like Expo has quite a few tools that can help people move away from App Center. Obviously, it's not a 100% like one-to-one replacement, but there's quite a lot here for people to use. Because like all of this is happening, it seems like you're building a lot of new services and features. What's like in the immediate future for EAS? What can people expect like the next few months to bring for Expo and EAS?
Yeah, so I'd say in the next 30 days, we're going to be releasing something called workflows where like as I was describing before, where you can have this YAML in your build that says like, hey, run these test steps or these custom like commands. So we're generalizing that where you cannot just run it for just builds or tests, but say if you wanted to automatically like register people's devices, you could, or run updates automatically and chain them however you wanted, you could. And when people look at that, I'd say the first thought that comes to mind, especially when I first looked at it, I just thought, oh, it's starting to look a lot like GitHub Actions, the way it's declared and everything.
Well, you first said workflows, and I was like, sounds like GitHub Actions.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so I'd say that is the next step for us to be able to run more custom jobs in ways that people in our ecosystem need. I'd say one differentiating factor is that for GitHub Actions, what they really excel at is it's integration with GitHub. So when you run a commit or open a PR, it's really easy to see all the jobs and all the artifacts that were associated with that.
This is my big argument for GitHub Actions over like Jamin's personal favorite is Circle CI, and we used it for a long time, and he'll still get into a debate with you if if he has his choice about Circle CI. But I can't get past how convenient GitHub Actions is. Like, it's because a lot of the things you use CI for are related to when you like push new commits or open new pull requests, and it's so nice to have it tied so directly to your code.
Yeah. And in Jamin's defense, you could, if you look at a commit, you could integrate Circle CI with that, but it is because of GitHub, like GitHub's website that allows you to see that link. But if you went to their Circle CI website, you'll see in chronological order, like all the jobs that were run. But if you look at a particular job, you'd be like, how did I kick this off? Where did this come from?
Like, Circle CI is really great, really powerful. It has cool things like getting into a command line, like where you can like actually like type around and see what is happening.
Like shell into it, SSH into it.
Yeah, which is really cool. I think that's one of the reasons he likes it so much. And there's a lot more like concurrency features and things like that. But like for 95% of what I do, I'm trying to run my tests against a PR, and it's GitHub is way easier.
Yeah, so I say a big thing for CI/CD is to make sense of the artifacts and the jobs that are produced. So GitHub Actions excels in that you can see everything that's associated with the commit. I'd say one gap that is there right now is if you cut a release, it's very difficult to see end-to-end all the artifacts that are associated with the release. So everything from going to the App Store, all the builds and all the updates that are associated with, say, a branch cut or something. And like the state of that, or the state of QA, the state of like what are the release candidates, what got approved, and what made it to the different app stores. Like, you could do that in GitHub, but it's not quite built for that in terms of like a release management system. And that's kind of where we see the integration for our workflows shining.
Interesting. So you're able to kind of track an artifact through your pipeline and see like, oh, did it pass? Did its Maestro, like, here's the artifacts from its Maestro test run, and like, here it is in QA and staging and prod and etc. Is that?
Yeah. And to be like, who QA'd this? Who approved this? If the CEO, the marketing guy wants to see the newest approved candidate, they can just scan in the QR code, and there's like a workflow for that to let that happen. But that to see all the artifacts and all the flows as it relates to a branch cut or a release is something that we want to better support.
Yeah. It really seems like the best of GitHub Actions and EAS kind of coming together. Because right now it is a little bit disconnected, because we'll have our stuff running on GitHub and then we have our separate stuff in Expo, and it would be nice to have them come together. Unfortunately, we are quite out of time. This was a really, really great chat. I don't have a mom joke, unfortunately. Mazen, do you have a dad joke? Maybe we'll switch it up.
Yes, I actually do have one.
Go for it.
And this is courtesy of Jamin. So, double dad joke. How did the tooth cross the river?
I don't know how.
On the tooth fairy?
Oh my goodness.
Until next time, folks.
It took me a second. See, I think I appreciate your dad jokes more than Jamin appreciates my mom jokes. So.
Yes. Jamin's always like,
have you do it.
Until next time. Bye.
Yeah. That is it for this episode. Thank you so much, Quinn, for coming to talk to us about EAS and App Center. We will see you all next time.
Bye.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime.
As always, thanks to our editor, Todd Worth, our assistant editor, Jed Bartosky, our marketing and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Mazen Chami. Our producers and hosts are Jamin Holmgren, Robin Hines, and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/radio. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio on all the major podcasting platforms.